lot of prizes for your teaching. And today you will talk about music teacher assessment and critical race theory, a narrative of standards usage in County A.
When I consider the conference's theme, I think about something a music teacher named Jasmine, pseudonym, told me this past week about all the times she's been threatened or her students have been threatened because of the color of their skin. She said that no matter how much she spoke up, no one ever did anything about it. Ironically, when an administrator was fired for issues of racism, people approached her and said, "Why wouldn't you speak up?" In keeping with the theme of this conference, I think the more appropriate question is, why didn't anyone listen? I ask you to consider this question as we discuss music teacher assessment and critical race theory. So let's break this title down for a moment, starting with assessment. Assessments become a euphemism for separating students behind veils of school data and standardized testing. Studies show that white students are commonly tracked into good classes, where higher-order thinking is encouraged, while black students are often tracked into classes with inexperienced teachers who focus on drilling and teaching to the test. In other words, our education system is rooted in white supremacy. But what about music? Standardized music tests have also privileged white students over black students, including the language used within the tests. Solo competitions have favored white students over black students, and white ensembles are scored more favorably than black ensembles. Therefore, NIME is looking for more research on the topic. I began to study the tenets of critical race theory as described by Delgado and Stefanczyk. They posit that racism is the norm, not the exception, that it is kept alive through false narratives presented by those in power, and we therefore need to hear the counter-narratives provided by voices of color. Why does this theory matter? Because we pretend that we are all the same. We pretend that racism is dead. And yet we still use assessment practices that separate along racial lines. And we hide the word race behind all of these myths. For example, achievement gap hides the fact that assessment constantly creates opportunity gaps instead of closing achievement gaps. Or even more egregious, intelligence deficiency is actually a euphemism for eugenics studies that continue to take place in the 21st century. What we don't hear about are the schools with black students where students are high-achieving, civic, artistic, creative, critical, and multifaceted. And that's why we need to listen. Yet how can we listen when we have a curricula and standards that reduce cultural narratives to data and force students into a hierarchy? Whose knowledge counts? Whose knowledge is worth knowing? And in terms of critical race theory research, while many studies have examined curriculum and instruction in relation to the theory, few have addressed standards. Hess found music education as a whole to be silent on race, providing insufficient solutions to the issues of marginalization. So how can we determine if this is in fact happening in music classrooms today? In 2011, a group of music teachers came together to develop the Tennessee Fine Arts Portfolio, a peer-reviewed assessment in which music teachers submitted artifacts of student growth in music. They were required to submit 4 artifacts, and among create, perform, respond, and connect, at least 3 of those 4 domains had to be represented. So if all the standards were equal, we would expect each domain to be represented in about 25% of the artifacts. However, in a separate study, I found that perform is represented in the Tennessee portfolios about 46% of the time, while connect is represented only 10% of the time. In another study, I found my participants saying that they submitted 2 perform artifacts and 0 connect. One would say, the school, they like performing, and the other one said, my principal just counted our concerts. The emphasis on perform is also policy-driven. Perform's been intentionally listed as the first set of standards. Perform is considered in Tennessee as the, quote, major work of the grade, which actually means that textbooks are required to have lessons that correlate with 100% of the perform standards. This is not true with the other standards. So why does this matter? Well, if NAFME addresses the standards as equal and important for the facilitation of culturally responsive teaching, then why does Tennessee list the perform standards as the most important? Why are textbooks in Tennessee required to have lessons that correlate with 100% of the perform standards, but not any of the others? I therefore argue that if we do not question the performative direction of music education in the United States and abroad, we will continue to emphasize Eurocentricity that glorifies a white supremacist paradigm. This is why I began to learn about County A in Tennessee. They are a majority black county with high poverty and a majority of businesses owned by white individuals, issues of equity, but upon learning about their school district, they are also professional, talented, high-achieving, and award-winning, Lastly, their portfolio standard submissions use perform less while using connect more. So therefore, in order to further the tenets of critical race theory and music education assessment, the purpose of this narrative study is to examine a teacher's perceptions of the role of race in music teacher assessment at a majority black school district in Tennessee. My questions included, how would you describe the music education community in County A, and how have assessment standards impacted the music education community in County A? So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Jasmine. Jasmine is a female black high school music teacher in Tennessee who was selected purposefully based on her achievements as an award-winning band director in a majority black school where standards such as create, respond, and connect were used significantly more than perform compared to the rest of the state. Before going further, I should mention that I'm a white, male, Caucasian, heterosexual who grew up in an upper middle class family with patriarchal family values. I served as a peer reviewer and textbook reviewer in Tennessee, but I never met Jasmine until this study. Jasmine has read the final copy of my paper. We've discussed this presentation together, and she's provided feedback. She also sent me her portfolio data, as one of my jobs in Tennessee was to score teacher portfolios. Now we're going to talk about Jasmine's experiences in County A. Jasmine began playing instruments around the age of 10. She started on recorder in elementary school, and her parents found a clarinet on a bus. It had been abandoned. When no one claimed it, she was able to use it. From there, she had acquired the opportunity to do private lessons and excelled. She was in honor bands and eventually went to college to play clarinet. She was always in all of the high-achieving groups, but when she went to college, she said the classical realm was not very forgiving for minorities. She said that she started to perceive herself as behind. And she was the only black clarinet student in the school, and she was also the only clarinet student to not be placed with the professor of clarinet. She was placed with the grad student. But the grad student, being a person of color she described as Hispanic, she felt a great deal of empathy with this particular teacher. They were able to connect and discuss issues of racism, and that teacher ended up actually becoming the professor of clarinet at the university because the former professor left the school. So all those students who were getting to study with the professor were now studying with the new professor who had been Jasmine's teacher. Philippe describes this experience as having a minority racial ethnic self-schema. In other words, to me, being an African American is great because I'm part of a generation that overcame so many obstacles. She actually became one of the top musicians in the entire school. First chair, clarinetist in all the ensembles. The person they would look to anytime there was a performance in that area. She was the go-to person. She achieved in spite of all the issues of racism. She then went back and wanted to teach in County A, but her teacher said to her, "Oh gosh, that's a hole in the ground. Do you really want to work there? You know it's predominantly black, you know, they're terrible. Do you really want that job?" No one had any respect for that school system. She described teachers and administrators as trying to track her into a school system away from County A. And when she did go ahead and go to County A, she found that the principal had rumored racial affiliations. 98% black student body staffed by 10% teachers of color. The homecomings were racially segregated. The band festivals, she would take her students, and there would be an all-white ensemble that she described as, they were terrible, was her description. And her students did quite well, and yet her students scored lower. And they scored 5, overall 5, which was the lowest score in this case. And crowds were actually going, ooh, 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 and heckling. And then the principal was saying, quote, he did not want them playing a certain kind of music, and I was told that when I was hired. So they wanted to suppress a certain behavior for the children. And so when I came in, I was brought in to bring order. Bettina Love describes this as white rage. then the students showed her something different. They went up to her one day and said, "Can we show you this song?" She said, "What song?" She said, "Well, okay, go ahead." This is what she said. They started playing this tune and it sent chills through my body. The range of the trumpets, everything they played, and everybody in the crowd. Everybody turned around and looked like, "Oh my gosh, what is that band?" It was like I had unleashed a monster, and at that point I was like, "Okay, I'll listen to you." She started having the repertoire be very much co-constructed with the students. She focused on culturally responsive teaching, but this is immediately what happened. The principal would be in my face. As soon as we played something, he would be right there saying, "Didn't I tell you not to play that?" And the students would be so angry, and they figured out that it wasn't me. And then they understood. Because, as an aside, some of the students were wanting to quit because she was very much restricted to very specific repertoire to do. Quote, "But then I didn't have the support of the community because it was like I would try to be diverse and do something on both ends, but no matter what I did, there was no applause. There was no applause for their kids." At festivals, comments would say things like, "They don't have pride," which was often a euphemism, as Timothy Grell would talk about, of a judge that once said, "Here's that black band I was telling you about," followed by a comment that the band should earn a rating of a 2 or 3, in that case was a low rating. So she started to pull them away from these places where there was racialized scoring, and she said, "I bring them to places and they would see the diversity, how white people could support bands with black kids and white kids in it, regardless of who is in it, and they just couldn't believe it." They partnered with colleges, and the students would start to see themselves as college students, and she said, "I recently just got my group to where I could take them to honor band, and I have 4 students now that are auditioned for college, and they're going to be playing in college." They made college. But even with all the successes, and even to the point that she was receiving these awards and was asked to be an adjudicator for band festivals, situations would still come up. They went to a festival one time where they paid for all the registration, but when they went for registration, they said they don't have the name tag. And they assumed that they didn't pay for it. So she thought, okay, that's fine, and went ahead with the situation. Then she went into the room. This is what she said. "I go into the room where all the judges are." Remember, she's an adjudicator. Of course, it's all predominantly white students at this honor band forum and everything. I know no band directors there, and everybody looks at me. And I felt like a record scratches when I walk in the room. And all these young band directors have their laptops, and they're talking about what they're going to do when they go into the room and everything. And I go in kind of like, "What do you need me to do?" And they're like, "We don't need you." She was ready to leave that festival. In many cases, they had experienced racialized scoring and all sorts of issues. And she was ready to do it this time. She ended up speaking to her mom, and she said, "My mom reminded me, it's always been this way. You've always been a minority in this area, so you just have to tough it out. Be strong for your kids. Maybe this time around, this group of kids will be different." Something was happening that was different with the younger generation at this point. She said, "They told me, everybody wanted my Instagram. I met so many friends. When we went to dinner, they were all waving at my kids, and they were just like, hey!" They were just elated, and the other kids were sucking my kids up. They loved them, and they had a great time. Something different was happening with this younger generation of students compared to this older generation of teachers that were saying, "We don't need you." How does this all connect to assessment? She had a number of things to say about assessment. She said when you're looking at that in a music class, they're not looking at the fact that they're using all those skills at once simultaneously in an instant quickly. Instead, they're looking for them to be analyzing something and having a deep, in-depth discussion in your class. She said, our problem solving, those things that they score low on, we get scored low on as teachers, and that's something I think should be restructured because they're problem solving when they fix a measure, but they don't see it that way. It's true. When we fix a measure, we're improving solutions. That's the words that exist in many teacher rubrics, but it's not seen that way. They focus on test drilling and performance. She said, because of state-based testing, we're having to stop what we're doing to help with that. Now, we talked about the portfolio a little earlier. She felt very positive about the portfolio, which surprised me because most teachers who all scored high in a study I did said they couldn't stand a portfolio. She said the portfolio is a means of assessment by focusing on me as a teacher and what I teach as a music teacher. It helps me to look at specific skill sets for certain groups of students and build on their skills. It also helps me to be a creative teacher and innovate with how I present my lessons to students. She said, however, the evaluations that I receive separately impact my overall evaluation score, and the person grading my portfolio could rate me as a bad teacher when I'm a great teacher. I feel that in some cases it can be unfair because the person assessing is not looking at the obstacles that the teacher is facing or is experienced in the field of music. She showed me one of her portfolio artifacts. It was a Connect artifact about the connections between music and dance. It was a pre-assessment where the students only had a couple of names and dates, very basic ideas. And then a post that had this well thought out essay. And I want to share a clip that I found was really interesting. She said, this writer said, this student, there are many types of rhythms that dance, all mixed with a little of everything. The few traditional dances I elaborated on may have some sort of influence of the music of the present day. These are the rhythms that dance. And then they quoted Bob Gibson saying, the purity of movement, the language of life, core of our passion, it cut like a knife. The magic of rhythm, the dance of desire. She said, I got a 2 on my portfolio. By the way, that's below expectations. All these other teachers who had a problem with the portfolio got really high scores. She got a 2. The year before that, I got a 3. I'm not sure how my portfolio is assessed. I'm not sure who's looking at it. I don't know if the person who sees it can see what school I'm from or not. She said, I've had coworkers in the fine arts department who feel like I've been given low scores on my portfolio because the person looking at it can see what the school is. And they think that my portfolios are always, exemplary, so I don't know. I reviewed that artifact. It was a 5. I was a peer reviewer. I had it sent to another peer reviewer. It was a 5. So why was this person scored? Why was Jasmine scored a 2? So what are the implications of all of this as well? I found the experiences to be very consistent with Feligny's racial ethnic self-schema, which she agreed very strongly with, of the emphasis on achievement, awareness of racism, and connectedness. Because she said that the combination of her being very high achieving and high expectations for her students. She said, it is important to be patient and be willing to start from the beginning with any group and always have high expectations and never let a group settle for doing little or less. But they all experienced racism. From her experiences in college, of being the only student to not study with a clarinet professor, to the experiences with the principal, to the experiences as an adjudicator, to her students' experiences. But there was an emphasis on collaboration. The students made connections with friends at festivals. She made connections with the grad student who became the clarinet professor. She made connections when it came to even speaking with her mother about these issues and speaking with other colleagues. So it would be easy for me to talk about how Jasmine used Connect standards in her portfolio. Furthermore, it would be possible to guide the conversation into her opinions of the individual portfolio standards and their role in music. However, Nichols provides a powerful reasoning for problems like that within a narrative framing. Nichols said, narrative packaging fosters intelligibility by stratifying the research into a bounded form, but it can also erase the potent ambiguity of lived experience. From a large and messy data record, I wrote a story, but not the story, an impossibility from the postmodern perspective. This is a story, not the story. But what does this all mean? I believe that we need to recognize Jasmine's experiences with racism as an unjust norm, not the exception. That we need to promote feedback-driven models of assessment. We are talking about the value of narrative at this conference. How much can we value? How much more should we value narrative within teacher assessment or student assessment? And encourage that use. We need to change the idea of scores and go away from scores to words. Lastly, we need to take a more active approach in hiring people of color to evaluate, assess, and provide feedback for music educators. In short, there are phenomenal educators in or around Tennessee, and it is time for us to start listening. Or as Jasmine put it in our final conversation, minds are like parachutes. They don't work unless they're open.
Questions? Remarks?
I'm just curious about 2 things. So one is that Yasmin has a pseudonym, and the other that she's
Yeah, I actually asked her if she would be a co-author on this study a couple months ago, and she loved the idea. But a few weeks later, she called and said that the situation where she teaches, it would be very problematic for her to have revealed her name, which is very concerning to me because she's also a doctoral student. And so this is the kind of scholarship that we need to be hearing. So the process then changed to sending every copy to Jasmine and having conversations together about all of these things. So there were certain things that have obviously been pulled out of the story, and certain things that have been put into the story based on that.
So how do you see this progressing in terms of Jasmine's situation? I mean, the fact that she feels that she has to remain anonymous and she cannot use her own story for her own doctoral, benefit.
Absolutely, and it's a serious ethical issue. What she has said is, we would like to bring it to a point where she is becoming a co-author. So this study, moving forward, is going to always be that door to change it to co-authorship, which is really what I want. Because, again, as a white male heterosexual, I can't tell the story in the way that she can. So what it becomes is, for her value, it was going back to the part of the beginning, saying that when this principal was removed because of issues of racial injustice, she said that people would say, well, why didn't you say anything? She spoke up many times. And so she said that she really wanted this story to be told today because she wants this to get out there. And she also wants this to get out there because she felt like there are often the same teachers that are mentioned over and over again in the same educators. She has also said that she believes that she's considering moving into higher education pretty soon, and she believes that as she finishes her doctorate, which she's planning on finishing this summer, that will open the doors to things like co-authorship.
Thank you for a beautiful presentation, and it's actually sort of mind-blowing for those of us who don't know the South or ever worked in the South. It's sort of astounding. You could have been, I would have thought you were talking about like 1957 or something like that. There's a secondary sort of level that I'm hearing, and that is sort of the emphasis, and I'm not a public school teacher, but on competitions. And I find it actually disturbing, because as you were talking, I was reflecting back to my own junior high and high school experience, and how it's just to have to compete in music. There's just something, I don't know, I mean, I know that we all did it, and a lot of have kids that still do it, but there's something a little disturbing about it, that we have to put ourselves in these situations to sort of get slammed down to sort of then come back up, where we could actually just be playing for the sake of playing. So I don't know if you can address that, because it's really not sort of germane to your primary your primary lecture this morning, but there is sort of something, there's like an undercurrent there that I find a little disturbing. It's a little sordid that we always are sort of grinding for approval from judges.
Right.
I know in New York State, I was a NISMA player for years, vocally and violin and choir and band and orchestra. And what I learned years later, that the whole competition was really a project of Shermer Music. That they would say, well, if they have to buy music, we'll make more money, and that's where you can never use photocopied music. So I don't know if you can even address that, or I'm just sort of vocalizing into my own frustration.
Sure. No, actually, and I share a lot of those frustrations, both as somebody who grew up in New York State and did the NISMA competitions, and then has lived in Memphis for many years teaching elementary music. In Tennessee, there is a huge emphasis on performance, and that's actually why in a separate study I sort of mentioned that perform keeps getting selected by music teachers, and I think there's a lot to do with just in general assessment that's taking place, that everything is so performative right now. There is this huge emphasis on standardized testing. When we think about the value-added models that exist in terms of ranking schools, that is simply very much translated over into music education as well. And so in this case, I do find it very interesting, terrible, and interesting that Connect score was a 2. But the thing is, music teachers have been very much focused on the perform domain and this very competitive nature. And nature is the wrong word, but just this emphasis on competition and performance. And so I believe that this emphasis on connect, even as we just heard in the last presentation, just the beauty of connecting all of these different ideas together is something that is very liberating, but it is something that is not currently taking place. And so the fact that we can even endorse perform as the, quote, major work of the grade, we're just continuing to perpetuate this dominant idea of performance. So I 100% agree with you, and it's actually a big part of right now my research, trying to look at and see why are we so focused on perform, and what do we do to make that more balanced, and is it something that NAFME is really looking at seriously? Are we really looking at seeing that these standards should be more balanced, or are we basically just looking at the perform domain and saying this needs to be the majority of what we do, and these other standards are just that, other?
We have time for one more question. Okay. Well, thank you very much for an interesting presentation. And then there